Hi, it's Amelia here from Undercover Architect. I'm really excited to be bringing you this video because in it I talk with Frances Cosway of White Pebble Interiors. Frances is an interior designer based in Melbourne and she founded White Pebble Interiors in 2010. And in this video we actually talk about her own home, which was built in 2014. Together with her partner and her children, they designed and created this beautiful family home that they call the White Pebble House. And it's a great example of how sustainability can be created on a suburban block. She talks through about a lot of the details that they incorporated, the material choices, the ventilation systems, the landscaping, the natural pool. Frances generously shares their journey and their learnings along the way. She even talks about some of the things that they would do differently if they had their time again. I hope you enjoy this video and that you find a lot of really helpful tips for creating your own forever home. Well, Frances, it's fantastic to have you here, and I'm so excited to be talking about the White Pebble House because you and I actually connected when I shared it on Undercover Architect's social pages, and you commented that it was your home, and it sort of blossomed into this fantastic conversation. We've got lots more coming up for the UA community, which they'll find out about soon. But yeah, your house is stunning. And to know that it's also sustainable, it's this glorious example of what's possible in terms of getting it right in this area, and being sustainable doesn't mean a compromise in the aesthetic and the lifestyle in your home. So can you just tell us a little bit about who actually lives in the house? Who was the house created for?
So it was created for a family of four, effectively. So my husband, our two children, two girls, 8 and 9, and then also an element I had to also then facilitate my business. So we specifically designed for that as well. And just on your comment as well around having a house that looks good and is also sustainable, that was really one of the key things that we set out to prove that it could be done.
It's a stunning home, and I'll
Thank
pop
you.
some images on the blog so that everybody can see as well, and there'll be a link to that in the show notes so that you can check that out. Because there's some fantastic photos, and you do open it up for Sustainable House Open Day as well, so there'll be links for that too. So now, can you tell me a little bit about the home size and location, just in terms of sort of how it's the physical sort of size of it? And
Yeah, sure. So it's located in Bayside, Melbourne. So we live relatively close to the beach. It's the land is 766 square metres. So it's, I suppose, a relatively large suburban block. We're 15 kilometres outside of Melbourne. And the house size is 40 squares, which is quite large. That does also include the garage. We've got a double garage. So it is a large house. But we have then also obviously incorporated the sustainable principles. So that's probably, that covers that off. 5 bedrooms. It sounds like a lot. Each of our children have got a bedroom. One of those rooms is an office, which then also has been designed so that it can become a spare room, a secondary master because it's downstairs. It's got an ensuite as well as a powder room, so it's double-sided. And then we obviously needed a space. We needed a spare room because we originally had an au pair, and we have a lot of grandparents stay who live a fair way away. So that room does get used. And the flexibility with that is it's not open, it's got a door so that we can actually use that as a kids retreat later on.
oh, fantastic. Yeah, and I mean, what you've described is fairly customary for what most homeowners that I speak to are seeking to create. And that I'm finding more and more that homeowners are needing to think about, they're not living near their family, so they do have grandparents come and stay for extended periods, or they're also thinking about perhaps that the grandparents may move in at some point, or like you say that as you get older in the home, you might decide to live on the lower floor rather than on the upper floor. So it is that thing of just understanding the home's going to last a long time and need to accommodate perhaps the flexibility around these things, isn't it? So it's
Exactly. It needs to adapt. And I mean, I call it future proofing so that rooms can be adaptable, which is probably why I'm so big on having flexible floor plans and doors so that rooms can be more than one thing at any time.
fantastic. And I mean, as an interior designer, I know as an architect, whenever we've built or renovated it, there's a certain level of additional pressure and expectation you put on yourself, I think, because it's an opportunity to experiment and test ideas that perhaps you haven't been able to convince clients to do, but you also know that it's a permanent record of how well those experiments might have gone. How did you feel embarking on this process of designing and creating your own home in the White Pebble House?
Look, I was really excited because I knew that this was going to be our forever home. So I knew we were going to be here for 10 plus years. So I think the most exciting thing for me was we didn't consider resale. We didn't consider what anyone else was thinking. It was purely built for us. I didn't look at it about trends. I wasn't following any trends. So I really, I suppose, followed my own design philosophy that I talk about with my clients about follow your heart, always use things that you love because you'll never tire of those things, and forget about what you're seeing on TV and everything else. So I really was able to do that with this home. And it's not to everyone's taste, but really that's not why you build a forever home. That's not why you actually build. It's got to be for you, and you've got to have some sort of emotional connection. So I was really excited about that. Probably the thing I was most excited about was I'm a massive fan of Morocco, and I'd always wanted a Moroccan-inspired bathroom, and I thought finally I can do it. And I couldn't get the materials at the time because the house is 4.5 years old. It was very, very difficult. But I was able to get that type of look in one of the bathrooms. So I was probably more excited about that than, well, that was one of the most exciting things for me. But there is the pressure, as you say, around, you know, that particularly because my office is at home at the moment, I knew that clients would be coming here. So there was that pressure. But the other thing in the back of my mind is I can show people what we've done, and I knew that I'd be able to use it as a almost like a showroom, I suppose, in some aspects, and that's been really beneficial. So there's pressure and a bit of and lots of excitement too.
That's fantastic. And I love that, that idea, which is something that comes across in a lot of your work and in your book as well, this commitment to it being your home and it being about you and your family and what you love having around you every day, and not about it needing to be, magazine worthy to satisfy latest trends, but being magazine worthy because it's you showing what you do as an interior designer and what your core values are as an interior designer. So yeah, I think that it's a fantastic way that you've described that. The sustainability part though, was that always a goal, or did that happen more organically? What was sort of the conversation and the thought process around making it so sustainable as a home?
It was definitely a goal. I think that was the other reason we really wanted to build. We'd really toyed around with the idea of renovating. I'd actually never lived in a period home. I'd always had new apartments when I lived overseas, and I really had this dream or desire to have a really beautiful period home. But when we really thought about it, there were so many negatives for us from a sustainability perspective. It was going to be a lot harder to do it, and there would have been a lot of things we had to compromise on, and we realised we had to build from scratch to get it as sustainable as possible. So that was really a core value and a core goal that we really didn't deviate from. Sure, we had to make compromises, but that was definitely something from the outset that we wanted to achieve.
And was that driven by a commitment to the planet, wanting to save money on ongoing maintenance costs, or what was sort of did you have a main sort of thought process around why it needed to be sustainable?
Look, I think it was a combination of us wanting to be good to the planet. We're both, I suppose, quite environmental in our outlook. We both lived overseas. My husband and I lived in Europe. So to see what they could achieve over there and how far behind we are in Australia, we just knew that it was doable. And we'd experienced living in homes overseas that were really comfortable all year round. And it's very difficult to explain that to someone unless you've lived in that environment, that you don't need to put on artificial heating or cooling. So I suppose it was a combination of that. It was a combination of really being good to the environment. And I suppose we wanted to do as much as we could for the planet in, the fact that there's not really much going on in Australia from a legislation perspective.
Yeah.
We wanted to then go and do our own thing and be less reliant on, high electricity bills and, just being able to use our own water from what we've captured from the rain. It just feels good to be able to do those things. So I suppose it's a little bit to give back to the environment and the planet.
I'm finding this is a consistent theme, actually. People who've travelled overseas lived in better designed, better built homes than what's sort of customary in Australia, and coming back and realising it just can be different and it should be different, and we are behind and we've always done these things this way, and it's time that we caught up. So, and this, I actually, when I put out one of the episodes recently, and the question that I posed was that, do we really need to build this way in Australia because we're in such a mild climate? And somebody actually emailed me and said, do people seriously still think this? And the hilarious thing was, wasn't hilarious, but it was a 38-degree day for me that day. Then the next day was over 40 degrees, and I was like, we are not in a mild climate anymore. This is not a mild climate. You know, we need to accept Australia has extremes. Those extremes are lasting longer, and our homes need to be better built in order to keep us comfortable during those times. So when you were thinking about this, making this commitment, did you think, okay, we're going to have to budget extra for this? How did you factor that into sort of shaping your budget for the project?
Look, I suppose we knew that it would probably cost a little bit more, but I think there is a big notion that it's going to cost a lot more. My husband is now a passive house consultant, and I think his reckoning is it's around 10 to 20%, depending on, I suppose, the size of the home and things like that. So it's comparable, and we made very conscious compromises. Everyone works to a budget, and you know, we had a budget as well, but I suppose we made compromises on other areas. We did not compromise on the build structure. You get one go at the build structure, and it's really the things that you can't see that we put the money into, but we knew that that was going to have an impact on the comfort of the home and how it was going to be. I think in Australia, people are bigger is better. And in Europe, coming back to your point before, bigger is not better. Good design is better.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Oh, I need to put that on a poster. That's because it is. It's that exercising of restraint and realizing where your investment's going to make the biggest difference to the long-term durability of your home and your lifestyle overall. Because, you know, you might love the Caesar stone bench tops, and you might love, you know, that incredible pendant light fitting, and you might love the whiz-bang, you know, features that you've put in, but you'll be, you know, in 5-10 years time, when the materials that you've built from, or the structures, you know, letting in moisture, or things are starting to deteriorate, that will be what you're frustrated by day in, day out. And when you're having to then shell out $2,500 a quarter in electricity bills because you've got the air conditioning running so frequently. So it's all of those things. I love this value. It's like you say, everybody has to build on a budget. A budget isn't a bucket of money. It's your opportunity to exercise what you value, you know, like what do you value, you know? So, yeah.
That's exactly right. And we had actually a lot of people that we knew building at a similar time, and they said, we're going to build a sustainable house. It was so exciting. I think a lot of people that we know are going to go through this same journey. And in the end, they chose to have bigger, they chose to have massive pools, they chose to have a bigger air conditioner because they sold their soul, I suppose, and didn't follow. And I suppose we're passionate, so we were not going to do that. It just had to be. We made other compromises that most people wouldn't see. We know that they're there, but there's no way we were going to compromise on the sustainability. This house is built to last. It won't be knocked over in 20 years.
Yeah, I love it. So can you talk through some of those sustainability measures that you incorporated? So particularly starting with the design sort of ideas and how you went about designing for sustainability.
Okay, so I will have a look at my little notes because I didn't want to miss anything out. So some of the things that what we incorporated, so we've got Hebel panels, which is a lightweight aerated concrete. We've got really good insulation in the walls, and I suppose that's something that's very passive house, insulate until you can't get an inch more in. So 4.5 in the walls, 6 in the ceilings with a flat roof. We did a wall wrap, which is not that common in Australia, and I can remember when we were getting it installed, we had European guys doing it, and they said, oh, we've never seen this here. You're doing a wall wrap, which was great, and I always describe that as a blanket around your house. We've got a heat recovery ventilator, which means our house had to be air sealed. So we actually had a Dutch consultant come in who did the air blower test to make sure where the leakages were, and he then filled in all the gaps in the frame and so forth. We made sure we had shade devices on particularly north and west facing windows, and the best windows that we could possibly afford. Now, obviously, we could go and spend $100,000 on par hammer windows. Our budget didn't reach to that, and this is, I suppose, one of the compromise. We put in the best that we could possibly afford, but we had low E and argon filled and thermally broken.
Okay.
And orientation was really important. So we set out about, I suppose we've incorporated passive solar design principles around orientation, but then also a lot of the passive house principles, even though it's not a passive house. We've subsequently learnt much, much more since we've built. And so there would be a couple of things that we would do differently from that aspect. But I suppose they're the core things that we set out to do or incorporate.
Fantastic. And what orientation was the block facing? When you looked for the block, did you specifically look for something that was facing a particular direction?
Absolutely. So we've got a east front, west back, but we knew that we could actually design so that we could then have an alfresco that was northeast facing. So that was great. It actually had an opposite orientation with the house that was on the block, which I must add was beyond any sort of renovation. We were not keen to knock down anything that was salvageable. It really was completely not salvageable. So I felt okay about that too, because that's also an environmental impact, that we weren't just knocking down a perfectly great house to build something to our own spec. So sorry, I went off track there, but that was important. So yeah, we did not look at anything that had a south-facing rear. We didn't look at anything that had a west-facing front. We'd lived in that orientation before, and I really disliked it. And I love the fact, actually, I didn't think we'd enjoy having a west-facing garden as much as we do, because we see the sunsets, but we also get the north. So, and we've planted out the alfresco as well, so that we can minimise the impact of the west shading with a ornamental grape that then loses its leaves in winter, so we can get that west coming in, but in summer it completely shades it out, which is just stunning.
That's a great idea. Yeah, using that deciduous planting to make sure that you're making the most of that winter afternoon sun.
But orientation of the block was absolutely critical.
Fantastic. Yeah, and so designing for orientation, clearly a lot of material choices, mechanical systems, those types of things. You mentioned, and you've got a blog about opening up for the Sustainable House Day on your website, which I'll pop a link to in the show notes as well. But you talked about people being interested in about things like the timber tiles. You mentioned the clothesline choice, I think, was another thing that people were interested in. What have you found been people's reactions to some of the things that you've chosen, and when you've sort of pointed things out, have they noticed that, because when I look at your home, I think, well, it actually doesn't look, from the photographs, it doesn't look extremely different to a contemporary home, so, but it's obviously got all of this, this fantastic sustainability built into it. So the timber tiles and those types of things, what have you seen people's reactions, and what have those been, those things that you've chosen? Whereabouts did you source them?
So the timber tile, I'm so passionate about these tiles. I actually specified the tile before we even had found an architect. And there was a couple of reasons for the tiles, and I think why people were so blown away with them when we open the house, or when anyone comes here, including the tradies when they were building, was they are so lifelike, and they're a digital print. They look so real, and yet they are low maintenance. One of the main reasons we chose them, there was two main reasons. One is the aesthetic, the warmth of timber. You just can't beat it, and it's just such a beautiful aesthetic to have a timber look. And I know some people will say, well, it's not a natural product, but the reason we chose tile is because of the thermal mass in the concrete. So having a timber floor or any other sort of floor would have compromised on the thermal mass that we're gaining from the slab. So the way our house has been designed, with the north-facing alfresco and living area, the northwest, is that the winter sun will actually completely come into that space and warm the floor naturally. So, of course, the tile allows us to do that. And then in summer, the sun is completely blocked because of the way it's been designed, so that floor remains really cool. But the other thing is it means that a natural timber would act as an insulator from the slab. So that means that we're not getting the thermal mass that we wanted to. So it's twofold. It's, I suppose, another sustainable principle, but aesthetically it's beautiful, and it's absolutely no maintenance. So my kids it's a great party floor.
That's fantastic. And in terms of some of the mechanical systems that you touched on, can you talk us through more detail about some of those, like the heat recovery system and those types of things, the solar? What's,
Yeah.
you obviously had to go through a bit of a learning curve, I imagine, with some of those things. You talked about getting European specialists to help you out. How the technology and understanding that, and then also what you know in terms of how they work. What's been your process around all of that?
So Neil was heavily involved in all of the sustainability measures because it was his passion. So he was really big in finding the right heat recovery ventilator. So he researched the market, and in the end, we chose a French brand. And I don't know if you're aware that in France now, a heat recovery ventilator is compulsory for every new build.
Wow. No, I
Like,
wasn't aware.
yeah, so that's awesome.
Yep.
So we got the heat recovery ventilator, and the way that works is your house needs to be air sealed. Is this what you want me to explain?
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, so it needs to be air sealed or relatively air sealed, so that you're not getting any leaks. So with not getting any leaks, it means that you're not basically pumping out all the cool air outside in summer and also having that hot air come in through drafts. And conversely, also then in winter. So predominantly in winter, you're not losing all that heated warmth and letting it escape. But obviously, with an air sealed house, that then creates moisture, and you've got no fresh air coming in, so you've got no air flow in the home. So that's when you use a mechanical, I suppose, airflow device, and it's using fresh air from outside. You've got a duct, a little vent in every room, including the bathrooms. We don't have anything vented outside. And then you're able to have that flow of fresh air coming in, and the recovery ventilator, and you probably can explain this much better than I can, brings that air from outside. It's using the warm air from inside and then exchanging that air and then bringing that fresh air inside, but it's at the room temperature of the home inside. I
Yeah.
bet you can do this better than me.
No, no, that was awesome. I think that it's this thing, isn't it? What I'm finding in sharing information about, sustainable approaches, these mechanical ventilation systems, and having airtight homes, is there's a concern and a hesitancy, I suppose, just from people not knowing. Or this feeling counterintuitive that I'm going to lock my house down, I'm not going to let any drafts in, and then I'm going to pump air in and out of it. Are you kidding me? That's going to be like being in an aeroplane, it's going to be horrible. It's going to be just germs floating around and those types of things. But I think that the difference is the filtration system that gets used by these ventilation systems that enables you to dry out moisture, remove dust, remove allergens, remove any terrible smells. It's that thing of, it's the ultimate ability to control the air. And I think that what's been coming through for me is you just have to walk inside one of these homes to notice and feel the difference, that this isn't actually, it's still fresh. It still feels light and comfortable, and, smells great. It's not stuffy. It's removing all of those standard pollutants that you experience on a house every day that you've just become accustomed to. So.
And I suppose further to that, and I think that's the really frustrating part when you're trying to let people understand how that works, is they almost need to live in a house like that for a couple of weeks. It's almost like a try before you buy. And I can understand the hesitation with, what is that? Do you mean you don't open the windows? Sure we do. We open the windows all the time, but it just means in winter when people want to open the window to let fresh air, and you don't need to because you've got that fresh air coming in. The other thing I love about it is when you've been away and you've locked up the house for a couple of weeks, you come back and it doesn't have that dusty, non-lived-in smell, because the fresh air, you sort of tone it down a bit. You can control the airflow that's coming in and out. So that's fabulous as well. So. But yeah, it is, and I think that's probably because there's a bit of an expense. They're sitting at around between 10 and 15,000. You can't see it. People don't really know what it's going to give them, and that's probably, I think, the first thing that they scrub off, unless they've experienced it.
But you'll spend more than that on a ducted air conditioning system in a 2-story, 400 square metre house. So
ram that up and spend their $2,500. But it's that, I think that's the biggest challenge. I try and invite people here a lot so that they can sort of experience it, and it's a really hot day and they'll say, oh, it's really temperate here, but you need to live in it to really know. And a couple of things that I actually forgot to mention, the other things that we did, which was we put in a 20,000 litre underground tank, which was to service our garden, our toilets and our laundry, which I know a lot of people don't like to do, but again, like you say, you've got the filtration, cleaned the clothing perfectly. Um, and we also had we didn't want to break the insulation, so we have got our shaver cabinets recessed into the wall, which is quite normal. But that then means that you won't have the insulation going straight through on an external wall. So we made sure we double framed that area. So we
Gotcha.
still have the insulation going behind anywhere where we had a niche. And I think another really important thing that I wanted to mention was it wasn't just about the house for us, it was about the site. So yes, you can have a sustainable house, and then the site doesn't really marry in with what you're doing. So that's why we also then had a native garden, our vegetables, our compost. So everything is true to the whole sustainability cause rather than just the house itself.
That's yeah, and it's that holistic approach of thinking about your living experience from boundary to boundary, isn't it? So with the underground tank, is that sitting below the slab of your home? Did it
No,
go in first? Whereabouts is it?
it's in the rear of the garden.
Hmm.
It's actually underneath our veggie patches, so you'd never even know it was there. But we can still access it if we need to, and it's got a big pump in there, and it's very rarely empty. So we fill the pool with it as well because there's no need to use mains water for the pool. So
It's
um,
extraordinary, isn't it? Because you think in a suburban garden and yard with a 5 bedroom house that you wouldn't be collecting, you'd still need to top it up in some way, shape, or form. But and it's not a big undertaking to include that type of tank in your home, particularly if you do bury it in the yard. So, I mean, I know we here living in a more rural location, a regional location, where we don't have town water, we're on tank water for everything. So, and we drink rainwater, we shower in it, we do our laundry in it, and then
yeah.
we have creek water that we use for other bits and pieces. So it's a very different mindset to when you're just used to turning on the tap and then paying a bill at the end of every quarter for the privilege of
Mhm.
it. So I love that you've built in these things. It must be, I don't know, just that liberation of knowing that you don't have these high cost energy bills, high cost water bills coming in, that you're not subjected to the growing costs of those things because of this investment that you made up front. It must actually,
It
if you
does,
just be, has it
yeah,
just become customary for you, or do you still get
yeah,
that buzz
it
of it?
is. But I suppose even beyond the dollars, it's more that we feel that we're doing our own contribution and taking the load off the planet with the things that we're doing. And I suppose we're not taking our resources for granted. And it's also really good for the kids to learn this too. I mean, they just think it's standard. And that's great that they can grow up like that too. Even though we do live in the suburbs, we don't have I'd love to live in a place like where you live, but you can do it on a suburban block. And I think we really wanted to show people that it's possible.
Yeah, I just think it's brilliant. So now, can you talk me through your pool? Because your pool is gorgeous,
Thank you.
and I know that it was a very special feature,
Yeah.
and it's got some special sustainability features.
Yes.
Tell me all about it.
Okay, so we call it the billabong. Well, it is a billabong because it's a natural pool, so I suppose those words are interspersed. But it is special because, again, it's quite a new thing in Australia. They're huge in Europe, these natural pools, as you can imagine, in Germany and Austria and places like that. So it doesn't use any chlorine or any salt. So it's like you're swimming in a lake. So it's absolutely beautiful that you can come out of that, not have to shower because you need to get the chlorine off or the salt off your skin. It's beautiful. So any sort of pond or lake. And what I love about it too, which is not to everyone's liking, is we've got an ecosystem going on there. There's dragonfly nymphs, we've got tadpoles, we've got water beetles, and then it's got water lilies in it, and reeds and things like that. So it just looks so inviting. It's not a natural. It's a natural shape, so it's like an organic shape that's surrounded by boulders, basalt boulders, which they actually meant something to my husband from where he grew up.
Oh,
And then it's landscaped with all these beautiful native plants. And I suppose I call it the water feature that you can swim in. We don't cover it. It's just something beautiful to look at all year round. So it doesn't look like a conventional pool, and it is a
wow.
tall because it's so unusual.
And so, what's the lining of it?
It's the closest thing that I could call it. Dare I use these words? Like a pebble mix.
Yes.
from
Yeah.
the that used to surround conventional pools in the 70s and 80s.
Yes.
So it's quite a natural lining. Some people line them with rocks, completely with rocks, but the pebble mix actually comes up into the rock, so it looks like it's all blended. So it almost looks like a sandy. It's a natural shade. We haven't coloured the pool. I didn't want a blue pool, and I felt that it also went against the sustainability thing of then going to stick in a chlorinated pool.
Yes.
It sort of just didn't make sense. So I wanted a green pool. And so we actually chose the colour of the pebble mix to enhance the greenness as much as possible.
Fantastic. Yeah, and when you have a look at the photos, it's a natural feature in your back garden that isn't just something that you're looking out of and sort of dealing with through the winter months, waiting for the summer months for it to be warm again to use. But it's this lovely feature that adds to the value of your garden year
Yeah.
round.
It's so much more lush now than when the photos were taken. It's almost like people walk in and it's much cooler out the back as well because it's just there's so much garden, so much greenery, which we've planted all of. But it is much cooler and it just feels like a suburban jungle oasis. It's very dense in foliage, and we've got a lot of birds that are coming now, a lot of native birds. We talk to our magpies, so it's just in creating all this additional wildlife that's coming that hadn't been there before.
Isn't that amazing you've been able to create that in the burbs? Like, it's just gorgeous. Yeah.
Yeah, so as much as everyone around us is basically developing and knocking down every possible tree conceiving, all we're trying to do is just plant more trees. So, but it makes such a difference. And again, people have to live with that to really understand the difference.
Yeah,
It makes
well,
such a difference.
I think too, I've spoken about this before, that the connection to nature, the connection to the outdoor environment is actually something that's essential for our health and our well-being. A lot of what we do in terms of designing for orientation is about being connected to those daily cycles, those seasonal cycles that we've become really disconnected from in urban development, but are actually they're proving scientifically, it's not just anecdotal anymore, but they're proving scientifically the difference that this makes to our health, our mental health, our physical health, our well-being overall, our stress levels, our anxiety levels, all of these things.
Absolutely.
So to be able to create a home where you can walk in, feel connected to nature, connected to the seasons, see the sunlight, know that you're, operating in a sustainable way. This isn't a question that that we spoke about, but how have you actually seen that shape your lifestyle and your the well-being of your family overall in the last few years?
Look, I think for the kids especially, they're outside a lot. I mean, we are not really a technology-orientated family anyway, but the garden is zoned. So there's a big trampoline, but that's just basically completely camouflaged by trees. So you can hardly even see it. Then we've got our veggies. So they're really keen to go out and pick the veggies and what are we going to plant next. So they're really involved with that. But also just to go out there and sit and watch the birds duck into the pool and then go into the callistemons and things like that. And just to see the growth of the sorts of flora and fauna that are coming into the garden. We have a lot of nests built. We've had a bat come in and build a nest. We've had a couple of birds build nests, and the kids are absolutely ecstatic. They see the eggs, they see that. I just can't imagine that happens often in a suburban block. But the kids are really connected with that, and we just love, particularly in summer, just going out there and having a glass of wine and just sitting there. And I can just sit there and look at the pool and just have that. There's also a slight trickle with it when it's filtering, and it almost sounds a little bit like a waterfall. Well, that's just the most soothing sound. So I definitely think that our children have benefited a lot from it because they're connected with the animals and the birds that we have, the parakeets and all that sort of stuff, and they love it.
Yeah, that sounds gorgeous. So, and it sounds like it's given you the opportunity to slow down things a bit because you can just sit and enjoy, which is what your home's supposed to be about, So, yeah,
Sure.
rather than looking around at all the headaches. So,
Yeah, right.
The filtration system for the pool, you mentioned that. Is it a large unit, or is that sitting separate to the pool? How does?
Yes. So we've actually had it built under the deck. So we've got a natural deck, a natural timber deck that's there. and that sits all under. So it's basically got a couple of hatches. So it's got a natural skimmer, a normal skimmer that you'd have in a pool, but without the system actually comes from Austria. And the skimmer is actually a frog-friendly skimmer. So it's got a little ramp that the frogs can climb up and not get stuck in the skimmer. So that melted my heart. So then it's got a filtration system, a second filter that uses the bacteria to eat the algae. Because, you do get that in a natural environment. Then it's got another filter that removes the trace elements, so the algae haven't actually got anything to eat. And look, it needs, my husband really looks after the pool, and he sort of says, look, it does need work. It's not like there's no work, but it's not as much, I suppose, as a normal pool. You just have to, clear out the skimmer and, flush it, the filtration system out once or twice a week. So I think it's worth it for what you get.
Yeah, no, it sounds amazing. And I mean, pools are a lot of work. So anything that you can do to lower the maintenance on a pool is a big, and they can be a big energy sucker as well. So when you're lowering, and choosing systems that are more sustainable in that way, that can certainly help out. So, something else I just wanted to quickly ask you about was the Hebel that you've used. I have a lot of people who are curious about Hebel as a building material. They struggle to sometimes get builders on board with it. It's a commonly used material in a lot of commercial, but it does take a certain type of builder to want to use it. How did you go about, did you find that difficult at all, or was that not your experience?
No, look, I don't know whether that's a regional thing or not. We've even got volume builders down here using Hebel, which I was surprised about. But we had no issue with, we had to teach our builder a lot of the things that we needed to do, like sealing the house up. He'd never come across any of these things before, so we actually really needed to educate him on a lot of things. Hebel he was really fine with, I suppose, because it goes up quite quickly. They have a lot of support. The actual company, I believe, has a lot of support, but we had actually no issues with that at all.
That's fantastic.
So maybe regional, and I think I'm seeing a lot more Hebel being used around, and which I feel is great. Because I think it is a great product. We've certainly had no issues with it at all.
Oh, that's brilliant. No, I just know in certain locations around Australia, the gangs of tradies and those types of things are geared up to build with. So, for example, in Western Australia, there's a lot of double brick used, and in Sydney, it's a lot of brick veneer. Queensland, it's obviously a lot of timber frame and lightweight. I remember when I was at Mirvac, we would go down to Melbourne to see large developments, and they were doing precast concrete, and they just had their heads wrapped around stuff that we were always having difficulty getting done in, say, New South Wales or Queensland. So it's great to hear that it's used so commonly in Victoria, because I think that when you start to have those conversations of, well, that it's only a state away and they're using it fine. And Hebel too, like you say, they are always, whenever you're trying to get a material on board in your project, I always recommend calling the manufacturer and company of that material, because they'll often have recommended installers. They'll often have training programs that they can help, because their interest is getting their product out into more projects. So that it was I think it's a good point to call on Hebel to help out, and I think it's great to hear that your experience with it's been a good one. So
it's been great, and we did call a lot of the manufacturers. We checked, or Neil checked a lot of the products that we were using that were recommended to us. He'd go and speak to the manufacturer on just about everything we used to make sure that he felt the spec was right and that it was going to be suitable for us. But no, I definitely agree with that.
Fantastic. Now, can you tell me, you mentioned a little bit before that there were a couple of things that you'd do differently if you had your time again. What, it's hard to imagine because the house is so stunning. What are the things that, what are those things that you think, and I suppose you've had, obviously, this was built, you said 4 years ago, so the learnings I imagine that you've had since then, and also the advancement of this part of the industry as well, the availability of products and materials, it's only getting better, and so you learn more, and you think, oh, I wish I'd known that back then. What would you do differently? Is there anything that sort of really jumps out to you?
Look, I suppose we compromised on a few things from a budget perspective, and I wish we could have done those things. So I suppose where it was going to matter, that's where we did put the money. So, for example, we don't have a Hebel floor between our first and second floor, which for soundproofing would have just been amazing. We had to use yellow tongue in the end. Not such a biggie, but I think it would have been really good to have that. The original design was also going to have a flush alfresco floor. So inside and outside would have been completely flush. Massive cost for the doors, the drains, meeting the regulations. So that went. And we also were going to have it frameless going outside. So it would have been just one big massive space. The engineering, the steel required for that. So aesthetically, that would have been amazing, but we saved over $100,000 taking that out. And for me, or for us, it was don't compromise on the structure. It's a nice to have from a design perspective. It would make it plus plus, but we can live with this. Like, pull your head in, just get the sustainability right. So if we had the money, that would have been awesome to do that. I suppose from a couple of interior perspectives, I specified solid acrylic surface for the bench tops. They're throughout the entire house. Really, as you said, to test it for my clients as well. I hadn't lived with that surface before, but it's repairable. It's a fabulous product. But I chose a dark colour, knowing in advance that it wasn't going to be it's definitely as durable, but it does show more of the scratches than, say, a lighter colour. And I suppose if I had my time over, I'd probably choose a lighter colour, but I still love the product. Another thing was we really entrusted with the architect that we weren't going to need external shading for our east windows. And we challenged him a lot on that, and he assured us we would not need any sort of external shade protection for the windows. So we didn't do it, and we need it. And I really wish we had have gone with our knowledge rather than his and put those in. Another thing probably would have been that we didn't want to go to council to get any sort of planning permit because dealing with our local council is a nightmare. We'd dealt with them before. So we built within the parameters of Res Code, the Victorian regulation, as well as the council regulations. And what that meant was we didn't go and get dispensation for a higher roof line towards the back of the house because we're on a sloping block, which meant that the children's bedroom ceilings are lower than what we really should have done because they can't get ceiling fans in. And I really regret we didn't do that. But the thought of going to council was just, we can't do it. And I think that was a compromise we shouldn't have made. And I suppose the luxurious thing is we've got a large enough ensuite that we could have had a bath. And I think it's a bit over the top to have 2 baths in one house. But I think from a private oasis just in my own space rather than hanging out in the family bathroom, that would have been really nice. But, hey, that's a first world problem. That's not anything to be I don't feel it was a compromise, but it would have been a really nice to have.
Yeah. No, and I love your honesty because it's actually really rare to have particularly designers share, okay, this is what I would do differently. And for the UA community, it's a gift, to get these kind of designers' insight into actually, because, customary. So are the kids' bedroom ceilings 2,400?
Big mistake.
Yeah, and you feel like that's still too low to put a ceiling fan in it?
Too low.
Yeah.
You need 2.7. It's just too low. And also the other thing is my daughter now wants a loft bed. She's got about 20 centimetres to get into her bed. She's happy with that, but it'll only last a year.
Yeah.
And I just think, wow, we should have just gone to council and got that dispensation to just get better ceiling heights for them. And look, I'm really open with my clients like I have been here. I don't want them to – I'm not going to be so arrogant to say I just do it because we did it. It's like learn from this. We should never have done that.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Yeah, it's interesting though, isn't it? Because I know New South Wales is similar. Have a lot of Sydney clients really trying to avoid full DAs and just going through complying development certificates. And it does set you up, obviously, to have to make certain choices about the project in order to accommodate that. And it is, it's difficult because you say, well, we should have pushed for it, but at the same time, you don't know whether if you had gone down the planning permit process, would that have blown up a whole other, can of worms that means that the house, there would be more significant compromises. So the beauty of 2020 hindsight is that it's 2020.
That is true. And when you get councils, you never know what you're going to get on the day.
Yes.
So, and we'd been through that experience. But look, I think ceiling fans just, I try and put them in everywhere in clients' houses. And And I'll be honest about something else. In our own bedroom, which does have a higher ceiling height, my husband wanted it, and I said, over my dead body, we need a pendant light in there. I want the aesthetic of a pendant light. And after a couple of years, it was like, he said, can we please have this fan? And I said, all right, we'll have the fan. I'll get rid of the pendant light. Well, it's just been gold.
Yes.
It's like, oh, this is, and of course, you've got to get a good fan that's silent.
Yes.
But I just couldn't believe the difference, even though we don't really need to cool it up there that much. It's just so beautiful. So every house now that I deal with, it's like, get the ceiling fan in. So just disappointed my kids can't have that too.
Yeah. Oh, look, Frances, I think you're giving them lots of gifts in other ways in the home that you've provided for them. And it's been such a joy to hear you talk about this beautiful home. And I'm really grateful for your generosity in being so open about, your journey and what you've created. I'm going to pop a link in the show notes to your website, your book, the information about the home. There's photographs on the blog as well. So I really encourage listeners to go and check out photographs of the home to be able to put images to what we've been verbally describing, because it's a stunning home and such a credit to you guys, because I just know that when you did it, this would have been a journey, and it would have been this and it would have probably felt like a great big whopping experiment with concern that it might just flop. And so for you to have been brave and tenacious to get this built in the way that you did is a true credit to you guys. So thank you so much for your time, Frances.
Thank you. Thanks, Amelia.
Cheers.
Bye.